Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Axis Bank, I welcome you to the 21st edition of Treasury Market Talks. Axis Bank has been instrumental in serving a wide spectrum of customers through its innovative financial solutions and products covering large and mid corporates, multinationals, agriculture, and retail businesses. And the bank has leveraged the power of technology to provide uninterrupted, best in class service, benefiting its wide customer base. We aim to equip clients with high quality inputs around emerging issues. And to this end, we've begun the Treasury Market Talks, TMT, with well respected thought leaders within the macroeconomics, geopolitics, and market space. We've been honored in the past by presence of many eminent speakers as part of this initiative. I'll name Nobel laureate Professor Joseph Stiglitz, Professor Michael Pettis, the China expert, Professor Otmar Ising, who is the ECB's first chief economist and an inflation expert, and Baroness Ashton, who was the EU's foreign policy chief maybe a few years ago. The talk series has been well received by all stakeholders with great enthusiasm and participation from corporate leaders as well as other diverse fields. Today, we take a lens to the recent election results, delving into the underlying trends along with their political, economic, and market implications. We're privileged to host P. Vaidyanathan Iyer, who is executive editor of the Indian Express, a member of the Pulitzer-winning International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. He's also a co-author of Panama Papers, the untold story of the trailblazing offshore investigation. Mr. Iyer is Neelkanth Mishra, Chief Economist at Axis Bank, as well as Head of Research and Whole-Time Director at Axis Capital. Some housekeeping announcements before we begin. Participation in the webinar is by invitation only. Axis Bank reserves the right to block access to any person to whom an invitation has not been sent. Unauthorized dissemination of the contents of this webinar is strictly prohibited, and prior explicit permission of Axis Bank is imperative. As a reminder, all participant viewing panels will be in the view-only mode. Participants who wish to ask questions may post them on the question box on your screens. Please note that this conference is being recorded and may involve the presence of the print or media. On behalf of Axis Bank, I once again welcome all our customers to the event. And I hand over to Neelkanth. Over to you.
Thanks, Tanay, and welcome everyone to the call. I'm very excited to have this conversation with my friend Vaidi. Very welcome to the chat. Let me start off with the basic question, which I think everyone has after these surprise election results. How do you think the functioning of the government changes due to the return to coalition politics? We've had 10 years of a stable single-party majority government, and now we are seeing a return to coalition politics. How does this change government functioning?
Yeah, I think, in this last, coming just to the verdict, how do I look at the verdict? And then I'll definitely talk about, how the government kind of functioning changes. One is, say about last 2-3 years, I do visit Bombay very often, once in at least 4-5 months. And, I would get the sense that, much of the corporate sector in Bombay, from what I gather, talking to people, meeting so many people in my trips, is that the corporate sector is always, by and large, they have favored single parties. And by and large, they have also favored the BJP, a BJP government, because of probably many reasons. One could be also primarily the political ideology of the party. I'm not so sure, but that's the sense I always got. So, but last 2-3 years during my visits, I've heard many people tell me that thoda ankush chahiye, some restraint. That could be many reasons for that. But when I was hearing these voices, and then a former editor of mine, Mr. T.N. Nayanan from Business Standard. Many people read him he's a prolific writer, used to be a prolific writer. So he wrote in December 2023 that there is cheer and fear among corporate sector. And probably for the first time, he said that he gets a sense from random conversations or many conversations with corporate professionals and say industrialists that it is good to have a minority government and a coalition government led by the BJP. So, that kind of, whether the corporates wanted that or not, eventually that has happened. But, that's a sense that, many of us in journalism got that sense talking to the corporate sector. Coming to how the government functions, government will function a little differently. But, I wouldn't say that it would function dramatically differently. You have to look at it from the point of view of how much does BJP itself have in this government. 240 is not a small number. And Narendra Modi as a politician and as the Prime Minister of India is not a person who's going to do anything with a gun on his head. Like, in the sense that given the numbers that he has, he's not going to dramatically change the way he functions. And the allies that he has also suggest to me that, both Chandrababu Naidu and Nitish Kumar, two of his key allies, they are politicians who are socially liberal in their mindset, but they are also instinctively reformist. So I don't see a change in functioning of the government as far as the economy goes, because I think all would be pretty reformist. But some of the ideological political projects of the BJP, which could have gone ahead, probably seamlessly had there been a, once again a major majority, that may require much more consultation. The rough edges may need to be smoothened, and I think this coalition helps do that.
Understood. And to follow up on that one, it is also, elections are kind of a test. I mean, it's a feedback mechanism where it's kind of a scorecard or feedback from voters, the citizens of the country. So what do you think really happened for this electoral reversal? And more importantly, how do you think the BJP interprets this verdict?
I think the BJP interprets this verdict in a manner, but I'm sure that there is going to be a lot of introspection. See, two states which dramatically changed the BJP's fortunes were Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra. Almost a halving of number of seats in Uttar Pradesh. While there is a lot of political grapevine about why this happened, I'm sure that is up for discussion within the BJP about why this happened and whether it was purely economy. Because had it been only economy, it would have affected India as a whole. That that could have been a free fall across the country. So my sense is that to some extent, economy plays a role, but I'm not sure when election time, it is only economics that plays a role, economy that plays a role. So we have every elections we have heard this story of unemployment. Unemployment is a problem in India for I think for 50 years. I don't think it's a problem of today or yesterday or day before. And price rise is also a problem in India. I think it is not that there have been food inflation. People will tell us that last 1 year food inflation was about 8%. And all this, hindsight intelligence about why political parties lose elections comes about. But something fundamentally must have changed in these two places for, say, the BJP to lose even Ayodhya is something quite interesting to figure out why. So one is BJP looks at the verdict that people probably in the Hindi heartland. So Hindi heartland is also very different, right? Say in Madhya Pradesh, they sweep the elections, Lok Sabha elections. In Uttar Pradesh, they don't. In Rajasthan, there is a restraint. So the elections will be read many different ways because of many different reasons, which could be local, which could be regional, which could be national. And I think right now, nobody would say that, but probably people are already talking inside the BJP, trying to say what went wrong and who's responsible for that. So it is not a very straightforward answer about, how would it. I'm sure that, in the BJP, the moderate voices will be heard more. Prime Minister may have to accommodate the moderate voices much more than he did in the past. He will have to listen to the coalition voices. It is the same Chandrababu Naidu who actually threatened to pull out of the NDA way back in 2002, right? He was one person who had made very strident remarks after the 2002 riots. It is all in public domain. He pulled out of this government in 2018. The first no confidence motion of the NDA government was in 2018 when TDP moved that notice. So I think there is a lot of history to how, and that was because, special category status, which, Chandrababu Naidu demanded way back in 2017-18, that was not given. And then, the no confidence motion came up. So there is a lot of history. So these voices need to be heard now. These voices. So even in Prime Minister's NDA parliamentary board meeting today, he talks about an organic coalition. So he is a very quick, he evolves very fast. So I'm sure he's so aware, much more than all of us, about the situation. And I think he talks about it in his speech today. He says that it's an organic coalition. It's a coalition which was formed before the elections. And he says that, we have seen 3 decades of coalition since 1999 when, NDA 1 under Vajpayee came into play. So I think, so there are implications, and I think, things which we had forgotten, like a group of ministers, maybe we'll see them now, an empowered group of ministers, maybe we'll see them now. So these things would come up to, discuss issues, policies where there is need to, evolve a consensus.
Understood. And and maybe I can add a bit to that. So there is, I think, on this as to how the verdict is interpreted, at least in the markets, there seems to be this view that the fiscal consolidation path that the government had embarked on, and that they'd actually been surprising the markets positively by consolidating faster than what was expected, that somehow that path changed. But frankly, I don't see that happening, and partly for the same reasons that you mentioned, that how this verdict is interpreted by the BJP and the senior leadership is not going to be focused only on the fact that there was an unemployment problem or there was a inflation problem, because frankly those problems have existed for a while, and as you rightly said, there were many poor states where the BJP has actually held on to even their vote share. I mean, it's doing very well on the seat side. And when people in the markets tend to extrapolate the verdict into fiscal laxity or change in fiscal stance, I think they're acting like a person with a hammer for whom everything looks like a nail. Because we deal with monetary issues, we somehow think that money is the solution to everything, or money was the cause, or the absence of money was the cause of every problem. There are many deeper political reasons why the verdict in Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh went very strongly against the BJP. And while there will be introspection and changes, and perhaps some changes will be brought about, those changes need not be on the fiscal side. In fact, what we are projecting is that when the July budgets are presented, the budget is presented in July, the fiscal deficit target, which was set at 5.1%, would actually be brought down to 4.9%, courtesy the very strong dividend from the RBI that has come in. So viewers will recall the budgeted number was close to 85,000 crores, but what the RBI gave this year was 2.11 lakh crores. And in fact, what we think is that the dividend in the next year from the RBI, given how the dynamics behind this dividend could actually even or will also be pretty strong. It may not be the exact number, but well above 1.5 lakh crores, and that provides confidence in the fiscal deficit target of 4.5% that the government has given for FY26. So our view is that the fiscal consolidation path that we are on, I think we continue. In fact, we may actually be doing better than what was expected. This was partly reflected in what happened for FY24, where the revised estimate was 5.8, but the final number came to about 5.6. Some of the reasons why that happened, like extra dividends coming in from public sector undertakings, is something that is likely to happen in FY25 as well, and if not in FY26 as well, because the profitability of some of these firms has improved quite dramatically, also reflected in some of the strong stock price movements that we have seen, and that provides a lot of fiscal comfort. And that means, I think, as we progress through the year and comfort in some of these numbers improves, lower yields of Indian government bonds. So that's very much aligned to what you just said, that the BJP's interpretation should not be a catalyst for changing their fiscal stance in any way.
But do you also see, Neelkanth, that the verdict, if you have to read the verdict, that there are pockets where they have done extremely well, pockets where they haven't done well. And say, for instance, UP is one pocket where they have done so badly, but what we have been hearing in the last at least 2-3 years is that in UP the Yogi government is very strong on development agenda, becoming very business friendly, etc. So what could have, would it be economy purely? Would it be jobs? Would it be large unemployment levels? Or is it the COVID stress which is showing up now over the last 2-3 years, building up on the stress levels at the amongst the poor people? What would you put your why would you think that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. See, one very important fact we have to keep in mind is that even though the economy is growing very rapidly, and it is among the fastest growing economies in the world, and frankly, growth rates are being upgraded, so growth is surprising forecasters on the upside, we are still behind where we would have been had COVID not happened. Now, the good thing is that we are catching up on that path. So if I was doing this pre-pandemic path comparison, say 1 year back, the expectation would have been that in FY25 we would be about 8.5% below the pre-pandemic path. Given how strongly GDP has grown in the last year and a half, which much better than expected, that gap is now going to be 6%. But there is still a 6% gap. Right? And if you think that the 6.6% growth between 2011 and 2019 was par for the course, or was the trend growth, then we are almost 10 months, 11 months behind. Now, the whole world is well behind as well. Right? So except for the US, I think everyone is nearly 1.5 years behind the pre-pandemic path. So India has done better than that in the recovery. But the unique problem in India is that India's workforce is expanding. Now, if you're in Europe, if you're in China, if you're in Japan, or even in the US, where most of workforce expansion happens through immigration, in India, so there's not a problem if you are, say, a bit behind where you were supposed to be. In India, if you are 1 year behind on the output side, well, you have 1 year of extra workers. And the impact of that on the workforce or on wages is actually much more than that, just that 1 crore extra people who have joined the workforce. It is on the whole labor force, right? Because the bargaining power comes down. And this is reflected in very weak core inflation. These are points that, of course, we have been discussing for a while. And whereas between 2014 and 19, so the government had undertaken many steps which touched individual households, which improved the living conditions, the lived experience of many individual households, like LPG cylinders, like bank accounts, like toilets, like electricity connections, like bank accounts, like DPT transfers. And because of COVID, the 3 of the last 5 years actually went into partly first managing COVID and then managing the aftermath of that. Because clearly, with the government bearing half the loss of GDP during the pandemic, there was no fiscal space to actually, or even the administrative bandwidth to first envisage and then implement some of these schemes at scale. So on both fronts, I think the connect with the lower end of the lower half of the population in terms of income was adversely affected. So partly that because the economy is still not caught up to the pre-pandemic path, it is getting closer, so things are improving. And secondly, that the schemes that had connected the government at the central level to some of the poorer households, there was no time to implement some of these schemes. And therefore, when you see schemes like the rooftop solar scheme, I think these are the kind of schemes that help the government build and rebuild that connect. And I would expect that some more of these schemes could actually be launched over the next several years in order for the government to re-establish that connect. But on the overall, I think the fact that they did badly in UP, but in an equally poor state, Bihar, while they did lose some vote share, they actually got and retained a large part of their seats. It's not that when MP there is a shortage of poor people. I mean, it's also one of the weaker states, and their vote share also didn't drop. In Chhattisgarh, they got 10 out of 11. Odisha, they actually won the state election. So, there are several interpretations of this. The first is that because of the 2 factors I mentioned earlier, there is a very natural trend of anti-incumbency. So where the BJP was a challenger party, it actually benefited from it. Where it was seen as the incumbent, the voters, and especially the poor voters would have felt that, well, nothing is not. I mean, my life is not as much better as I'd expected, and therefore, at least a few votes swing away. But I'm not a political analyst, and you are, and maybe you can help us answer or at least understand this better. That at least the commentary I've read, it seems that the Dalit vote in both Maharashtra and UP seems to have been ported very well by the opposition parties, and that say so the loss of the vote share that BSP lost went to Samajwadi Party. Do you think some of those trends differentiate? Because somehow in Bihar, because perhaps they were allied with the LJP, that transition did not happen, or that shift did not happen. Do you think this was also a factor, and therefore it is more political reasons why they did so badly in UP and Maharashtra rather than economic reasons?
Yeah, Dalit votes for sure, because, if you look at some of the statements which came out from ruling party members like Jyoti Mirdha, etc., about, that they might change the constitution, it may not be the party's dominant view, but then when you say these things, 4 people at 4 different states saying that, then it becomes it starts kind of spreading like wildfire. And in India, I think, if reservation is an issue, particularly in Maharashtra, because I come from Maharashtra, I was born and brought up there, Dalit activism is very, very strong there. And, in Bihar, you have seen that, people have seen what they have done. They have understood probably that Mayawati is not really in the political fray for winning seats, and they even elect Chandrasekhar Azad, that from Nagina. So I think that is, people are able to, Dalits are able, and Dalits are politically very active, and they come out and vote. And when they see that, and this is, BJP is one party which has not had a very, it has always had a very kind of, what shall I say? It is a very, not a disturbing, but it's a very on and off kind of statements which have come from the party and from RSS on reservations in the past. I remember one statement of the RSS chief last elections, made a whole lot of difference, and it was being talked about a lot, whether they have a view on reservations, whether they would want to have more and more reservations for economically deprived rather than socially deprived castes. So I think this is an issue which is at the core of Indian polity and society, and I don't think many people are ready for even a discussion on this at this moment. So I think the Dalits would have voted pretty much against the party, although there was a very very deep effort by the BJP to bring all castes. But that was one project of the BJP to bring religion over the caste, a layer of religion over the caste, which seemed to be succeeding in different places. I saw some bit of that in Tamil Nadu as well, which is, Tamil Nadu is again a, Dravidian state where castes are big, and caste is the narrative, and it is one of the most the social reform movements happened the earliest in Tamil Nadu. But then there was an attempt, or there was some success to what I saw in Tamil Nadu about a layer of religion coming on top of caste for the first time during my travel in Tamil Nadu. And, indeed, BJP got a vote share which is almost 3 times that of what it had so far. So, it was at about 3%, it's about 11% now. So that's quite a remarkable jump in terms of vote share. It hasn't got any seats there, but then it did get a good vote share, and its presence was felt. But Dalits is something which they tried, experimented, and of course, there are many Dalit voters who vote probably for the BJP. That's what we see during our travels also. But then when there is any talk about reservation, which I think became which became a big card for the opposition to play during these elections. You could see Rahul Gandhi with the Constitution in every other public rally and meeting, that he's going to protect the Constitution, and the Constitution was under threat. So in this narrative, I think it people get I think it swayed votes, both in UP and in Maharashtra, 2 states where Dalits matter a lot.
Got it. And so a quick follow-up on, so how does this change, or how should we, because there are 4 major state elections coming up, and I think so it's going to be equally important, because, and this was part of the reason why I think there was a movement towards one nation, one election, that policy making gets disrupted whenever state elections are due. And frankly, in an era of coalition politics, I think the importance or relative importance of state elections actually goes up. So with the Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Haryana, and Delhi elections now due in the next 7-8 months, what would be the political implications, or how do you see the politics shaping up, and would that have any implications on the economic side?
Yeah, I think very certainly. I think people say, for instance, in Bihar, there will definitely be more pressure from JDU to kind of give it the place of preeminence in the assembly elections there. demands for more funds. You have a new finance commission which is sitting under Dr. Arvind Panagriya now. There was the special category states issue which was which had long been forgotten. 2004, 5, I think, way back then. I remember every other leader would demand a special category status, but it never happened. Essentially, that more and more central funds with as grants rather than loans, where you don't have to pay interest on those funds from the central government. Essentially, demands for more funds at zero cost. So I think those things, whether they would now the central government will have to look at these issues very closely. One is that about whether you have to pay attention to the allies' demands. Second, I think in Maharashtra, say for instance, what we also saw on the ground was that the way in which the alliances were broken down. So you will also probably see more action in politics there than in other places, because in Maharashtra, it was like two parties broken, and then two parties already there, BJP and Congress, and you had Shiv Sena and two factions of Shiv Sena, two factions of NCP. I think you might there are already talks about news reports about how MLAs are talking about going back to their parent political outfits. So I think that to contain that, how does the central government respond to that? I think that will play a critical role, whether they are able to keep their flock together. Because finances does a lot of things from the central government. At times it may say, for instance, I always felt that the federalism question, when you say double engine ki sarkar, double engine ki sarkar, it also strikes at the core of federalism, because then essentially what you are saying is that if you are from my party, then you will get the best of it, and if you're not from my party, then please watch out. So you may not get what you want. So double engine ki sarkar, at many places the opposition will play with this, saying that you are not giving what is due for me. So I think those things will matter now in as we go head towards state elections. But my sense is that with allies like Chandrababu Naidu and Nitish Kumar, it may also moderate centralist or tendencies of the government in Delhi. So say for instance things like delimitation, where we thought that where we think that South will lose out because of its tremendous work on population and not get enough seats in parliament, and say northern states or Hindi belt may get many more seats in parliament than, because its population has gone up. I think it may prompt this government to kind of not do that, because you have a Chandrababu Naidu now at the cabinet. So the rough edges, as I said, you may it may actually moderate, and probably it will be the my gut feel is that it will be more moderate. BJP may swing towards becoming more moderate than kind of take on with more controversial projects.
Got it. And I in fact, I would, would say.
But I don't know. Let's say, for instance, if I may ask you, Neelkanth, that does, when states make demands of the central government, it does have an impact on first horizontal equities also, and because some states would, given that they are in a coalition, can extract their pound of flesh. So how do you look at this part of or is it something that is inevitable in a democracy or in coalition politics? Do you think that some states may opposition states may get more it will kind of sharpen the weaponry for the opposition if only coalition partners get better kind of funds from the central government.
So just to give some historical context to this, see, the special category status was introduced by the Fifth Finance Commission, I think sometime in the late 60s. And the 14th Finance Commission under Dr. Y.V. Reddy had actually done away with the special category status. And it was exactly for the kind of reasons that you are talking about, that earlier it was it could have been misused by the center in order to, in terms of being fair or unfair, depending on whether the state government was aligned. And so today it is not possible to have a special category status. You see, one of the reasons why the SCS was being discussed in the 2016-18 period, it was the first time 14th Finance Commission, 14 to 19 was its, 15 to 19 was its mandate in the term for which it gave its recommendations. So the horizontal devolution, so just for the benefit of the audience, there's a vertical devolution, which is of the tax revenues that the center gets, what percentage goes to various states, to the all states in aggregate. And then there is a horizontal devolution as to which state gets how much. That is, given that the SCS, the special category status, is no longer allowed by the Finance Commission, unless if it has to be reintroduced, it can only be reintroduced by the 16th Finance Commission once it gives the recommendation sometime in October next year, and then it would start from FY27. So it is not something that can be done very quickly without the Finance Commission being on board. And this in a way puts the checks and balances that the center then has limited ability to provide it. And I think this was the primary reason, I think, even in 2017-18, that the center said that, look, our hands are tied, right? That there's a Finance Commission, and now there can be some sidestepping of this. So, for example, there can be projects which are announced where a large part of the implementation happens in a specific state. And so those kind of proposals, I think newspaper headlines are talking about certain proposals and projects which are being considered for implementation in Bihar, for example. So there can be, I think, ways around it, but the actual special category status and the discretion that the center has in selectively allocating funds to various states, I think that discretion has been reduced significantly because of what the 14th Finance Commission decided.
Yeah.
And so maybe, see, we are now already 40 minutes into the call, so perhaps it might make sense to open up for audience Q&A. So, Tanan, do we have any questions from the audience?
Multiple questions. I'm going to put a few together because they're quite similar. So the first one I'm taking is from Tushar Agarwal of Vedanta Aluminium. He asks about foreign policy. So what he asks is, what sort of foreign policy are we going to have? And the other questions are around the lines of how credible are we as a foreign policy partner? Now, foreign policy is normally built with a 20-year horizon. Politically, things might get better, they might get worse for the ruling coalition. So how credible are we as a foreign policy partner going ahead, and how does that impact FDI flows coming in the future?
Yeah, so Vishal, so the point is that most regional coalition partners, their interests are generally localized, in the sense that they very rarely, even in the past, have had a very strong opinion about what India should do at an international stage. And so for the regional allies, generally the interests are, what can I do for my state? How can I cement my position in my own state? And so take to the state and say that, look, I demanded this from the center and this is what I've given to you. But on the fact that, I was able to, influence India's stance on, say, the permanent seat in the Security Council, that's not really going to win you a lot of votes at the state level. So the state allies generally stay away. Secondly, when you think about the ministerial allocations, the senior four ministries, which is Home, Finance, External Affairs, and Defense, given, as Vaidya said earlier, that the BJP does have 240 seats, it's very unlikely that those four, because the Prime Minister and those four ministers are the senior most members of the cabinet, and that means Cabinet Committee on Security, Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. So all of those, I think, are going to stay with the BJP. So there should be significant continuity. And remember that the elected executive or elected government is only one part of the government. There is a permanent executive, which actually maintains a lot of the policy continuity. So in most countries, domestic politics and international politics are generally not connected. In the US and a few other countries, that tends to become a problem. But in countries like China and India, generally there is not too much of connection. And therefore, the impact on foreign policy is going to be very limited on this. In terms of executive action, in fact, whether, so for example, if the UK was seeing prime ministers change every 2-3 months, it does not matter who the prime minister is, it's the seat that matters. And therefore, for foreign powers as well, I think interacting with the government and through the permanent executive, that is the Indian Foreign Service in this case, and the fact that the prime minister remains the same. So I expect complete continuity, and so should the foreign powers that are discussing with India. On FDI, frankly, FDI, the quantum of FDI is very often dependent on provincial governments, state governments. So because the state governments control the major factors of production, so land, labor, last mile cost of energy, many of the local clearances, and so that to a large extent remains the same. So some of the states like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, even Telangana, and maybe with the advent of Mr. Naidu, Andhra Pradesh, UP, these are seeing very significant inflows. Even Karnataka is doing very well on FDI, and so some of these states which have the bureaucratic machinery, which approves things faster, has created land banks, and they are very conducive. Those things don't really get affected. So there may be other issues like global availability of dollars, the industrial return of industrial policy in China and the US and all that. But as regards the impact of these elections on FDI, I think that will be fairly good.
Thanks, Neelkanth. This being a market call, there are actually many questions on equity markets, so I'll take them all together. How do you see price to earnings multiples and earnings growth for India faring over the next 5 years now? Has there any change from your earlier estimates?
Yeah, so so let's start with economic growth, right? See, the economic growth as of now, a very important driver of that is the real estate cycle, the real estate market. Remember that between 2012 and 2021, despite a growing population, despite fairly good growth in the number of households, despite the demand for larger houses, better quality construction, the value of construction of dwellings in India was actually not growing. So in fact, as a percentage of GDP, the value of construction of dwellings had fallen from 16.6% to 10.5%. Now, it is that rebound which is actually driving a significant part of the growth acceleration. So I don't expect that to change. And therefore, at least for the next 3 years, as the real estate cycle continues to drive activity, the resilience of economic growth in India, I think, I should sustain. And in addition, of course, there is a demand for power capacity, a lot of need for automation, the return of, say, or even investments around AI and its tools, the investments on global capability centers. There are many catalysts which mean that the economic growth should remain intact. And if the economic growth, underlying economic growth remains intact, and there is some deleveraging that happens because the economy at the corporate side is actually deleveraged, earnings growth should be quite resilient. So what is quite remarkable, what has been quite remarkable in the last 3 years is that whereas earlier, analysts would start at 100, and by the time, say with the first year's forecast, and by the time they got done, the estimates would have fallen by 20% to 25%. These days, in the last 3 years, we are starting to see earnings upgrade. So even if they're not massive upgrades, the very fact that we have 15% earnings growth visibility for the next 2 years is a very strong support for the market. On price to earnings ratios, there are several factors that drive that. The first is, of course, what's happening globally, given that, bonds are given, the fiscal profligacy we are seeing in the US and in other developed markets. Bonds are not really that attractive. A lot of money, equities seem to be the place to be. So PE multiples globally are still elevated, and so are India's. That's one factor. Second is that with the government prioritizing macroeconomic stability, the visibility of earnings. If you have any company, for example, providing good visibility of earnings growth that you can predict, which is why consumer staple stocks trade at higher multiples than say metal stocks. So as a country, if we provide reasonable visibility of medium-term growth, reasonable visibility of inflation, reasonable visibility of stability of the exchange rate, reasonable visibility on interest rates because of fiscal discipline, then the multiple automatically goes up. And there is a third factor here, which is that there is a $35 to $40 billion a year, so almost 1% of market cap, that is consistently flowing in through what I call unintended channels, in the sense that the EPFO, the Employee Provident Fund Organization, by formula invests 15% of its incremental flows into equities. Now, 8 years back, when it was started, it was only 5%. Now it's 15%. At that time, formal workforce and wages were much lower. Now they're much higher. That number is now $7 to $8 billion a year. Similarly, the systematic investment plans are now 20,000 crores a month, which, just for perspective, is like nearly $30 billion a year, which is a lot. And on top of that, you have growing penetration of insurance, and a part of that gets invested by formula into equity. So if you have $35-40 billion, if not higher, going into equities almost systematically, right? There's no discretion involved here or timing, an attempt to time the market. It automatically pushes up the market. So if you see the market behavior, or even what has happened earlier this week, whenever there is a 5% fall in the market, the mutual funds are sitting on 1.25 to 1.5 trillion rupees of cash because of the steady inflows, and they're kind of waiting for the market to correct. And the moment they see, and that is why the corrections have been very shallow over the past 2 years. And I don't see any reason why all of these factors should change. And therefore, I do think that Indian markets are very expensive. And therefore, I expect them to kind of time correct, meaning market prices should grow slower than earnings growth. But on the whole, I think the markets should remain quite stable with decent earnings growth going forward.
Thanks. Let me ask a question to Vaidi. This question comes from Iqbal Mansoori from Olam Agri India. He's the head trading there. Now, there are some unaligned regional parties, say the AIA, DMK, and the BJD, who in the past have voted with the BJP at the central level because they weren't a threat to them in their states. Now, suddenly the BJP might be a threat to them in the states. Well, what do they do now? What is their plan, in your opinion?
I think it is going to be extremely difficult for them looking at what has happened to these two parties, at least the ones that you named, AIADMK and BJD. Both have been like more or less. AIADMK has faced a rout in Tamil Nadu, and they were supposed to have a tie-up with BJP, but then it didn't happen because BJP itself kind of both probably did not distance themselves from each other for strategic reasons. And BJP, I think it is a party which is there is a patriarch who's he's the autumn of the patriarch, where it all depends whether the party can hold itself without without the key person in the party. So I think these BJP will find it much more easier to penetrate these states. I think, say for instance, I would rather think that in Odisha, for instance, Congress may be turn stronger because many from BJT in the absence or the way it has diminished now, they may actually gravitate towards the Congress, because there they might have opportunities to find positions or seats or candidatures in the assembly or in Lok Sabha states going forward. In Tamil Nadu, BJP will continue to find it very difficult, but I think given the call that it took in the Lok Sabha elections, it probably will try to figure out whether an alliance with ADMK and bringing together all the factions of ADMK, because ADMK, you would realize, is split into three now. There's a Open Neerselvam and there is a TTV Dinakaran faction which have all split from ADMK. So BJP may try to get them all together and contest the assembly elections together in an alliance. But BJP sees for itself strong kind of space. It sees for itself space in Tamil Nadu, given that it has its market share has gone up, and it will be for these parties to kind of stand up, organize themselves, just the way YSR CP did, when he took off on a Padyatra and then, went around the state. I think all these parties will have a task cut out for them. Odisha might be a slightly different case, though. Odisha is where I think, given the kind of route that BJD has faced, everybody thought that there is a stiff contest there, but didn't really see it going completely the BJP way in this election. There, I think it is you might see political alignments itself changing. Yeah.
Thanks, Vaidhi. There's one more for you. It's from Srinivas Singaraju of Coromandel. And he refers to the conversation where we spoke about, during the pandemic, the connects with, say, at the bottom of the pyramid in rural India was sort of severed or were unable to be completed, and as a consequence, popularity was lost. Now, with these numbers, what sort of ideas can be used apart from rooftop solar and so on? Your travels based upon your understanding. What else might be a good idea, which also ties in with state elections coming up?
To my mind, I think, some kind of income support I see as, because given that, what has happened, with Neelkanth may also want to add to this, given that there is such stress amongst the poor people, one thing is taken care of, that is food, which, through my travels across the country, I realized that, people value that 5 kg food grains, probably, prompting Rahul Gandhi to even to talk about doubling that to 10 kgs. So food is taken care of, but I think the income levels have really taken a beating at amongst the rural households. So which, the Congress's proposition of a support through an apprentice program or through by giving 8,500 rupees to every woman in an household, they probably got traction during this election. My sense is to revive consumption demand. What do? Can you really provide jobs to a large section of the people? Because they lost jobs. There was permanent probably demand destruction also during COVID times. If jobs cannot be provided and if jobs are not available, is there a need for an income support? I think these are questions which the government would think about. I remember conversations with people in the government who are talking about these things now.
Yeah, so
Neelkanth, to revive consumption, what would you suggest?
So, frankly, consumption revival is something that I think is likely to be an outcome rather than an objective. So long as you can get the growth closer to the pre-pandemic path and therefore address the slack in the labor market. See, in India, given significant underemployment, there'll always be slack in the labor market. I don't think we can create the jobs, all the jobs that are needed. I don't think China has been able to create all the jobs that are needed. But at least we can get closer to the pre-pandemic path, and in which case the economy comes back to the kind of equilibrium where capital and labor kind of had the same balance of power than as they did in say 2018-19, and so that should be the first objective. My sense is that the appetite for direct cash transfers in this government is very low, in the sense that other than PM Kisan and that one-off transfer that they did during the very first month of the COVID pandemic, if you remember, the money was transferred in April 2020. Beyond that, the government has generally refrained from actual cash transfer. So I think the philosophy, the belief system is to teach a person how to fish rather than feed them a fish. You see what I mean? And therefore the use of fiscal resources to provide gas cylinders, basically dense forms of energy, better quality housing, better quality water, and so those are the kind of productivity boosters that the government focuses on. So my sense is that, and here I think we are starting to become a bit prescriptive rather than predictive, but I think access to better loans. Remember that when we get to issues like job creation, we tend to forget about things like self-employment. Self-employment, sometimes is just a proxy for hidden unemployment or underemployment, but self-employment with access to capital, if you can provide that at the right granularity, can be actually a significant job creator and a big booster of the economy. So those would be, I think, and should be, in my view, the priorities of the government going forward. I personally don't think that cash transfers are going to really solve the problem for a long enough time. Second, that they would be the preferred tool for the regime.
Thanks, Vaidya and Neelkanth. There's a question from Shivakumar of Kali Suvari Refinery Private Limited. He's head Treasury there. Now, what are the risks to policy continuity? And remember another question. What is your best case and worst case macro outcome? And have they changed since the election?
So sorry if I got the question right. So what is the risk to a break in policy continuity? Is that the question?
Yes. And has your best and worst case macro outcome changed?
See, I think policy continuity, at least on the economic side, I frankly don't see any reason why that should change meaningfully. In the sense that, as Vadi very clearly mentioned, and I totally agree with him, that if you were looking for allies who are aligned with your thought process, you cannot think of two better allies to have in terms of progressive thinking. Say someone like Chandrababu Naidu, who 1998 got Bill Gates to invest in Hyderabad. In fact, if you remember, there was an era where Hyderabad was called Cyberabad. He was the first to make cabinet meetings of the state cabinet paperless using tablets. So he's very progressive in his thinking. He's very reformist. So I think that economic policy making in terms of focus on infrastructure, focus on attracting FDI, foreign investment, I think with him there is like complete alignment. Even with the Bihar chief minister, I remember that when he was railway minister, he was considered quite progressive. I mean, and some of the changes that he made, I think, partly helped his successor, Lalu Yadav, benefit from. But of course, I think lots of interesting changes that were made in that period in the railways, which allowed him profitability to improve. But he's also, I think, quite pragmatic, quite clean in his functioning. And I don't see necessarily that the economic policies will change. Now, best and worst case scenarios, frankly, I think that from a 3-year perspective, the impact of the central government's policies, other than on fiscal issues, and on fiscal, I expect continuity. Other than on fiscal issues, everything else the central government does starts to impact the economy after 3 to 5 years. For example, if say they implemented RERA, if they implemented GST, if they implemented the corporate tax cut, many of these big structural reforms are they show up with a lag. They don't show up immediately. And frankly, if we are thinking about the next 3 years, rather than the fiscal stance of the central government, the only thing we need to monitor really is how quickly is power capacity coming back up and how is the real estate cycle turning. But it's the growth beyond that that can potentially get disrupted if some of the critical reforms are not undertaken. But that's a question that will be better asked once the government formation has happened and we've seen the scope and structure of the new government.
Thanks. One more question from Venkatesh Ramachandran from BE. Now, you spoke earlier about the hard and soft capex between say highways and railways versus drinking water and all of those things. Yes, say that there won't be a shift away from capex, but does the share of soft capex now pick up as opposed to infrastructure?
Right. So, see, infrastructure spending as a percentage of GDP, I think has peaked. In fact, it have peaked even if the election verdict had been different, in the sense that at a central level, it is very hard to spend more. See, like national highways, if you have, say, 160,000 kilometers of national highways, and if you repair the national highways or 4-lane, 6-lane them, you can do, and 10% once every 10 years, then, the most you need to do is 16,000 kilometers a year. So it's very hard to spend or deploy a lot more funding into highways. When you look at Schedule 7 of the Constitution and look at the infrastructural areas which are part of the central subjects, there is clearly, roads, railways, civil aviation, basically airports, and major ports and telecom. Right? So these are the 5 major areas where now investments can be done. And telecom is now mostly private sector. The BSNL has had some funding rounds of late. In roads, we are kind of maxed out in terms of how much you need to build. I think a lot of it now, the state highways need to be built, but that's nothing to do with the center. And a lot of urban infrastructure needs to be built, which is the road connectivity within the cities, which again is not the constitutional mandate of the center. The only area where investment on the macro or major infrastructure needs to be done is in a meaningful way is railways, because that's still a government monopoly. And a lot will depend on who the minister is and how the traction is. But from what I understand, again, there, the capex numbers have gone up to 2.5-3 lakh crores, 2.5-3 trillion rupees a year. And there are detailed project reports which have been prepared for another 11 trillion rupees of capex. If you start sort of over the next 7 years, 6-7 years, and if you roll that back, that means that, meaning is add that over a period of time to the current pace, you could potentially have 4.5-5 trillion rupees. So as a percentage of GDP, I think the acceleration is behind us. There could be some growth driven by railways, but how quickly that is executed. Remember that even 5 years back, the fiscal resources were there for the railways to do capex. It was the inability to spend, it was the inability to execute on those projects, which was the problem. And therefore, who becomes the railway minister, how that railway minister is able to manage the bureaucracy of the railways. I think the previous railway minister did a spectacular job in improving the capacity of the railways to absorb and spend that productively. But we'll have to see how that shapes up in the next couple of years. On micro infrastructure, what you call soft infrastructure, meaning things that actually affect the productivity of households. Remember that most of these are centrally sponsored schemes, in the sense that it is the center which is choosing to spend or direct spending of itself and of the states into areas which are state subjects. So rural roads, electrification, and even rural housing. These are all state subjects. These are not central subjects. So what the center does, it says that, you know what, if you spend, so it tells the states, if you spend 1 rupee, I will spend another rupee, right? So 50-50, or it could be 60-40, it could be 70-30 in some of these schemes where the center says, you put 3 rupees, I'll put 7 rupees. So in that way, it channelizes investments into areas where the constitutional mandate is that of the state. Now, as we discussed earlier, this was an area, these have been areas where the center's direct connect with households forms, and that is the Prime Minister's rural road scheme, Prime Minister, so there was a Deendayal Upadhyaya Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana, which is the rural electrification, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is the rural housing scheme of the Prime Minister. So if you ask me, I think some of these, and it could be something to do with skilling, it could be something to do with access to funding, if you're an entrepreneur, something that boosts entrepreneurship. And I think allocation of fiscal resources in that direction could actually pick up.
There's one more question for Vaidhi. Now, everyone talks about coalition politics, but people often miss we finally also have an opposition leader, the leader of the opposition, formally. What does this change procedurally and otherwise?
See, I think what very clearly happens now, that given the numbers that the principal opposition has today, Congress of 99, they will be the leader of opposition. But then the complexion of the parliament itself changes quite dramatically, right? So with whatever 230 plus, numbers for the India alliance itself, the opposition space in the parliament complex itself, if you can visually imagine, they're not near the close halfway mark, but they're then not too far away from the halfway mark also. So the time that opposition gets in parliament in terms of just speaking or being heard, that time is also allocated based on the strength of parties in parliament. So if an issue comes up for discussion, the speaker allocates the time to all parties depending on their strength in the house. So opposition gets to speak more in parliament. And in standing committees and select committees of parliament, again, the representation of members of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha in these standing committees and select committees is proportionate to their strength. So, there will be voices of the opposition in all these standing committees. So, and things like, even how legislations are passed in Parliament. Previously we have seen instances of how money bills, certain laws which are not necessarily money bills, that is related to the finances of the government or the revenue, etc. Some of the laws which are not related to any of these issues get pushed through as money bills, because money bills, there is a flexibility of fast tracking the legislation, and the speaker has the final takes the final call on whether a legislation is a money bill or not. So I think these things changed the functioning of Parliament substantially if there is a stronger opposition. And I think the discussion of issues also becomes, I think, for now, I think the opposition cannot just at willy-nilly say that I'll step out of Parliament, I will, not attend Parliament, I'll boycott or walk out. Those things may not happen, to my mind, as they would have happened, and the government would have gone ahead and done its business. So I think in terms of outreach, the government may have to have a far meaningful outreach towards opposition. There might be discussions which are which would be more accommodative in nature, and also I think there'll be a sense of responsibility within the opposition not to step out or boycott. So I think the onus will also be on the opposition to kind of conduct itself in the House. So I think these changes in many ways how the Parliament functions.
Thank you, Vaidhi. And I'm aware of the time. We have gone a bit overboard, so we can perhaps stop it here. On behalf of Axis Bank, this concludes the discussion. I would like to take a moment to convey our gratitude to all our speakers for the time and benefit of their vast experiences. We look forward to our customers joining us soon for the next session of Treasury Market Talks. A recording of this discussion will be available in case you wish to have this passed on to your colleagues, or if you want to hear it again. I often hear old TMTs myself. To connect with your relationship managers for help. Once again, thank you all for joining us. You may now log out from this webinar.
Thank you.